Hello, and welcome to Mr. C's presentation on line segments. You heard about lines last time. We're going to talk about line segments this time. Kind of a weird word there, segments, but all it really means is pieces. So we're talking about pieces of a line. Line segments are line pieces. Here comes the big question, right? Why on earth do we have to know the difference between lines and line segments, Mr. C? Well, there's a whole bunch of good reasons. Lines are really difficult to work with. Why? They go on forever, to infinity and beyond. Remember that, Buzz Lightyear quote? Lines go on forever. So, in actuality, when we're actually working in the real world with lines, we're only working with line segments because nothing on earth can go on forever. So when you're building something or when you're designing something like a bridge or a house or something, architects and anyone who works with lines for a job is really usually only working with line segments. And of course, line segments are another building piece to polygons, another fundamental piece of geometry. So I really want you to focus on that word segment, and I want you to understand that the word segment means a piece or a piece of a line. Okay, so how are lines and line segments different? We're going to take a look at a graphic that we looked at before, and we're going to add a few things. And what you're going to notice is there's points in line segments. Okay, do you remember when we talked about points and what points are? And then we talked about what lines and what lines are. Well, when you're dealing with line segments, we have both lines and points on those lines. That's how we create those pieces or those segments. Okay, and as I've said a couple of times already, the key to understanding line segments is to really understand the word segment and to understand that it just means a piece. So you're taking pieces out of a whole line when you have a line segment. Okay? All right. And as we said before, line segments do not go to infinity. Line segments, you can measure them. Sometimes they might be 5 millimeters, sometimes they might be 5 miles, sometimes they might be 50,000 miles, but a segment of a line or a line segment does not go on forever like a line does. All right, let's get all this stuff out of the way here. Okay, take a look at this line. Okay, how do we know it's a line? Mr. C, how do we know it's a line? Well, let's do a quick little recap here. You can see that we have the line here. Okay, it's nice and straight, and the arrows tell us that it goes on forever. All right, well, so what we're going to do is take this line, and we're going to make some line segments with it. All right, let's start out right here. There's a point. Whoa, putting points and lines together, and there's a point. And when we're doing geometry, we always love to label our points. Let's call this point A. And we'll call this point up here point B. Okay, we give them names so that we know what we're talking about. So this distance, or point A to point B, is line segment. I'm going to show you how I write this. A, B. And I show that it's a line segment by putting a little piece of a line over the top of it. Okay, so now I can reference this and say, line segment AB is on the left side of our screen. Let's add another point. Let's add a point out here. Let's add point C. Now we have a whole bunch of line, well, not a whole bunch. We have a couple more line segments. Now I can talk about line segment AB like I did before, okay? Or I can talk about line segment AC, okay? And I can even write that line segment AC, and then I put the little line segment over the top. Okay, so now if I were to say, well, I would rather walk the distance of line segment AB than I would rather walk the distance of line segment AC. Well, why? Because AC is longer, it's further, and I don't want to walk further. So you see how people might in the real world talk about line segments or, pieces of lines. But look, we have another one here, okay? We have line segment BC. Look. It's the distance from B to C. Let's change the color of the cursor here so you can see a little better. That's the distance from B to C. Okay, so maybe, if you're talking about Maybe you're going to go on a walk with a friend, and they'll be like, "Oh, I'll meet you at point B, and then we can finish our walk to point C." Let's say you were walking on a road, and your house was here, and your friend's house was here, and you met at point B, and you were going to take a walk to your other friend's house who lives at point C. So that's how you might be talking about line segments in your real life. You might not mention that they're line segments, but they actually are. Okay, so let's look over here. We have a whole group of lines. This is a graphic that we used when we talked about lines last time too. And then underneath, came down a little preemptively, but that's okay. It says, line intersections make great places for points. They do. We're going to add some points into our sets of lines. So here's a point. Let's work backwards from the alphabet this time. Let's do point Z. Here's a point here, right? We're going to add point Y. Okay, ooh, that looks like an X. Let's say it's an X. Doesn't matter. We can give it any name. And just to prove that, I'll make a point down here and we'll make a random letter. Point F. Okay, they don't actually have to go in order. There's a line segment, or let's make a point here. Let's do point D. And now I promised that I would do point Y, so let's add point Y over here. There, much better Y. Oop. Okay, so now look, we have a whole bunch of lines, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. We've cut them into segments, or we've cut them into pieces. Look, see, there's line segment. Let's write down a few of these line segments. Line segment YZ. Let's show it's a line segment by putting a little line segment over the top. There's another one here. Line segment ZX. ZX is another one of our line segments in this graphic. Or we could go all the way to ZF. That's a larger line segment, but it is still a line piece or a line segment. And then let's get away from Z for a little bit. Look, here's another little line segment down here, DF. Okay. Take a second, maybe pause the video, see if you can find some other line segments that are in this graphic, because there's a bunch more. Some of them are kind of tricky to find, but it's really not that bad. And if you were to add more points to the lines, we would have more line segments. Okay, and look, if we put all these line segments together, look, we have line segment ZY, line segment YF, and line segment FZ, or ZF. When you put those together, we have a shape. We've actually created a polygon here. And I know we haven't talked about polygons yet, but look, we've put 3 line segments together. 1, YZ, 2, YF, and 3, FZ, and we've made a polygon. Look, there's other little ones in there too. Look, if we cut off XD here, or DX, whatever you want to call it, we've got a littler polygon or a smaller triangle in here. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of ways to put line segments together, or pieces of a line together, to create shapes. And just to recap it all, let's go ahead and what we learned, okay? Well, we learned a bunch of things. We learned line segments are building pieces for shapes or polygons. You saw that in that last graphic where we took a whole bunch of lines, we cut them into pieces and saw how they came together to create triangles. But they can come together to create octagons or decagons or, I don't know, googligons. I don't know how big polygons go. I assume they go to infinity. But you can use line segments to create polygons of all shapes and all sizes. They are actually one of the basic building blocks of polygons. We also learned the word segment means a piece, very important. If you ever hear someone talking about a segment or something, or I should say a segment of something, you know they're talking about a piece of something, okay? Like you could be asking for a segment of pizza, and really you're just asking for a piece of pizza, okay? Or maybe you could ask your friend for a segment of gum, and they would go, segment of gum, what's that? For you fool, it's a piece of gum. Don't actually call your friends fools. Friends don't like that. And then finally, we learned that line segments do not go on forever like a full line does. Okay, a lot of times, or all times, we cut our line segments from full-length lines, meaning Full-length lines go to infinity in both directions, but line segments do not go to infinity in either direction. Sometimes they're very, 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 very long, and maybe if you're an astronaut, you're talking about lines that are, or I should say line segments that are millions of miles long, but they do end. Line segments always end. They come to a stop at 2 points at both ends of the line segment. Okay, I hope that helped. Let's go ahead and try it. All right, I want you guys to draw 3 or more lines that intersect. If you need to back up and look at that graphic where we put the 4 lines together, go ahead. But I want you to make 3 lines that kind of cross in different places. You can do more lines if you'd like. At the intersections, go ahead and make some points. Label them just like I did. You can label them any letters in the alphabet you want. If you want to go A, B, C, go ahead. If you want to go Z, D, F, G, go ahead. But make sure that you label the intersections with points and give those points a letter. And then identify some of the line segments you made. Write them down. Maybe put a couple of them together and see what kind of shapes you may be able to make. Challenge yourself. Show your teacher. Show your mom. Show your brother. Challenge them to put some lines together and create some line segments to make some interesting shapes. And we're going to play with that a lot more in lessons to come. So I hope this helped.